Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Spy Chat. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us today. We have my superlative Executive Director, Chris Costa, leading our conversation with our wonderful friend, Malcolm W. Nance, counterterrorism expert, policy advisor, and media commentator. Malcolm is streaming into us live from Ukraine. Thank you for doing this, Malcolm.
It's my pleasure to be here, really. It's great. It's great to be on Spy Chat again and actually be out of where I was so I could speak freely and get back to not just my fans, but all the fans of the Spy Museum, whom I love.
Well, just a little background on anyone who's been in a closet for a few years and doesn't know who Malcolm is. He is a former career US Naval Intelligence Officer specializing in counterterrorism, intelligence, and violent extremism. And he serves as an advisor for the US government's law enforcement, Homeland Security, and intelligence agencies. As an Arabic-speaking special intelligence collections operator, field interrogator, he provided top-secret anti- and counterterrorism support to national intelligence agencies while on numerous reconnaissance and combat operations in the Balkans, Middle East, and sub-Saharan Africa. Malcolm is a great friend of the museum. He's a Spy Museum Advisory Board member. He is the author of many books, including the Terrorist Recognition Handbook, the New York Times bestseller, Defeating ISIS, Who They Are, How They Fight, What They Believe, and The Plot to Destroy Democracy, How Putin and his spies are undermining America and dismantling the West. He is also, of course, a frequent commentator in the media. But right now, over to Chris.
Amanda, thanks for the great introduction. Can't tell you how excited I am to have Malcolm join us from the Ukraine. So our program's going to be slightly different. I'm not going to spend a lot of time running through all the national security issues that I'm seeing from my perch here in DC, because we want to focus principally on Ukraine and what is happening on the ground there. And since we have Malcolm, since he is willing to talk to us about his perspectives, we're going to get ground truth from what he has seen, what he has observed on the ground in the Ukraine. And he and I have talked a bit on Signal and gone back and forth on some ideas so I could have perspective. So I was very grateful for that while we shared what we were thinking about on previous Spy Chats. So I want to dive in by focusing on Avril Haines. You might know, this audience would, that Avril Haines is the Director of National Intelligence here in the United States. The big question I get asked wherever I go about the Ukraine is, Chris, what do you think is going to happen next? Where does this go? How does this end? We asked those same questions in Iraq, interestingly, circa 2003, and in Afghanistan for 2 decades. But I'm interested in trying to understand what is happening on the ground now in Ukraine and hearing Malcolm's perspectives. But let me share with you the 3 scenarios Avril Haines talked about publicly last week, again, as the Director of National Intelligence. The first scenario is the possibility that Russia's continuing progress in eastern Ukraine would break the will of the Ukrainians, their will to fight and allow the Russian military to take over even more terrain, even more parts of the Ukraine. So that's the first scenario. We might, from a Western perspective, think that's a very bad scenario. I would agree with that, and less likely than the next scenario. So this scenario that Haines talks about is about a grinding struggle, a war of attrition that plays out as a result of some of the work done by Ukraine. And the second scenario is Russia will dominate the East. So we're talking about the Donbass, Luhansk, I don't even know if I said that right, Luhansk and Donetsk. I think I said that right. And there'll be a stalemate that takes place there as a result of the work of the Russians, but really the admirable work of the Ukrainians really checking and holding the Russians in the Donbass. In other words, Putin will be forced to keep his forces in the Donbass, in the two provinces I referenced. And third, the last scenario is that Ukraine would halt Russia's advance in the east, meaning they would be able to conduct a series of counterattacks. Now, some of those counterattacks are happening according to the media, but it's an open question if Ukraine can sustain those kinds of attacks. So 3 courses of action, the most probable, in my view, from what I see, and from what I can read in unclassified sources, is what Avril Haines said was the most likely, and that again is holding Russia's advance in the east. And that's because Russia will, in Clausewitz's words, culminate. They will not have the forces able to conduct more offensives across a wider front in Ukraine. So I hope that's distillable and understandable with our audience. I think it is. So I'm going to turn it over to Malcolm to hear his perspectives for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions. Malcolm, over to you.
Unmute. Hello. Well, thanks for inviting me. I know my audio is a little interesting because I am, in fact, in a safe house. For those of you who know anything about tradecraft, it's a secure location somewhere in Ukraine, which has been, let me put it this way, which has been cleared by the national intelligence agencies. It's designed for my safety, because for those of you who don't know, I appeared on Russian state television about 2 months ago, and by a woman named Olga Skabeva, who is known as Putin's mouth. And needless to say, I am the Legion, the Ukrainian Foreign Legion's #1 candidate to have a long walk out of a short window. So I'm actually en route back to the United States. I'll be in the United States for a few weeks, and I'm glad that I'm here to come to this presentation to give my perspective. I find it fascinating, the questions that Chris Costa asked, a little earlier, particularly those that Avril Haines posed, and some of the concerns. And usually they give me about 10 minutes to talk about, my overall perspective, and then we go into that. And I'd like to revisit those very questions again with a perspective from the ground. Again, for those of you who don't know me, I was in naval intelligence, naval cryptology, and now I'm a soldier in the Ukrainian Armed Forces. I am a soldier on a frontline combat unit. There is no such thing as a rear here when you're getting pounded by artillery in real time. And my activities take me to the battlefront daily. So I can give you a perspective that right now very few Americans can give you. On the other hand, you also may know that I was a geopolitical intelligence and counterterrorism and defense analyst for MSNBC for 7 years. And I quit that job to come join the Ukrainian International Legion, which is the only authorized foreign fighter force made up of Western soldiers here in Ukraine. There are a lot of other Americans and others that are fighting here, but they are not in a Ukrainian Army combat unit. They're attached to territorial defense units. The Ukrainian International Legion is in fact a combat unit, a frontline combat unit, as part of a Ukrainian regular army brigade, and we are a plussed up battalion that is added to them to give them additional firepower. We are a frontline unit. We face Russians along a very broad section of our battlefront. I can't tell you where, I can't tell you how many of us there are. I will not tell you the general composition, other than we are a truly international force whose working language is English, which makes it fun because we have detachments from Colombia, Korea, Japan, Venezuela, Brazil, a very large contingent from Brazil, France, Sweden, that all, some of whom don't speak English or don't speak English very well. So we usually have liaisons in that, but we are a frontline combat force, and we are engaged in our operations against the Russian enemy without anyone in between us. So I want to clear that up first, because a lot of misperceptions about who we are, that, there was one journalist who actually said we did not exist and that it was an information warfare operation and that there was no such thing as the Ukrainian Air National Legion. Well, the hundreds and hundreds of us in this job demur. So with that, as some of you may not know, I have been in Ukraine since the last week of January. So it means I'm pushing 6.5, almost 7 months in Ukraine. And I did come back to the United States for 10 days at the end of February. As a matter of fact, I accidentally left this country on the night of the invasion. I was on the last Lufthansa flight out of this country. And then when I landed in Dublin, the airstrikes against Ukraine started. So I came to Ukraine in January and February as part of my think tank, the Terror Asymmetrics Project, to do an order of battle and a invasion feasibility study of Russian forces that were poised around the borders of Ukraine and how they intended to invade. And we drove the main routes that the Russian army would have to come through in the east, from Sumy to Kyiv, from Chernihiv, north of Chernihiv, over the Belarusian border. We didn't go there, but they would come from Rechitsa down south, the routes that would lead through Chernobyl, out west in Borodyanka and these other areas, Kharkiv. I, in fact, went to Donetsk and Luhansk, which are the two. They are not separatist republics. They are actually Russian invaded provinces with lackeys that were appointed and said that they were independent Russian states, who then became, through fake referendums, Russia. Which means that when I met the battle force commander of the Joint Task Force at Donetsk in their headquarters in Avdiivka, which General Pavlov, when we went to the forward edge of the battle area, there we were 70 meters, that's 210 feet from the Russian fighting positions in the pre-war. And as Ukrainians will tell you, the war did not start on February 24th. The war started for them in 2014 when Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk were invaded by the Russian army. And it led to a bloody 8-year war. So the Ukrainians have a long view of this conflict that we in the West don't have. Some people who were interested in the invasion of Crimea, by the Little Green Men or private, mercenary forces or Russian military forces that were not wearing uniforms. We are the few people that found that interesting. On the other hand, the Russians have an agenda. And their national agenda is the reestablishment of Russian dominance in Eastern Europe. And if some of you think, well, that sounds like the Soviet Union and reestablishing the Iron Curtain, that's precisely what they intend to do. And I wrote a book about this 5 years ago, I believe, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, how Putin and his spies were undermining America and dismantling the West. And an interesting factoid of that is that they were doing it through the principal way they were doing it was buying Western political parties and sowing extremist influence in countries in order to destabilize them politically, and then their ultra extremist conservative views would dismantle the government. And they were buying right-wing neo-Nazi parties throughout Europe, including the OFA, Alternative for Austria, which was a Nazi party generated organization that was formed by 2 former SS officers in the early 1950s that won, with the assistance of United Russia, Putin's political party, control of Austria 2 weeks after Donald Trump won his election. They put spies, convicted spies, into the National Rifle Association, into the evangelical community in the United States. But they have dozens of political groups in Europe that meet. Vladimir Putin understands that the greatest threat to Russia is not, money or liberalism, it's democracy. And his strategy was to use KGB tactics and active measures to dismantle democracy through the best way possible, by getting democratic or countries to vote democracy out of power and establish what I called an axis of autocrats, where autocracy and totalitarianism would become the principal guiding ideology in the world. And true to form, Vladimir Putin, just after that book was published, he gave a speech saying liberal democracy is an anathema and that must be eradicated. I think his exact words were, liberal democracy in the world, is an archaic form of government that must be done away with. Don't quote me, but it's pretty dang close to that. Almost like he had read the book and said, Malcolm, you need a better blurb on the back of your book. So that being said, Ukraine is not a war. The invasion of Ukraine now that occurred in February 2022 has nothing to do with NATO. It has nothing to do, definitely nothing to do with Nazis. I've been living here for almost 7 months. There's not a Nazi in this country, and anybody that is has been long kicked out, beaten, or excoriated. This is about the fact that Ukraine has had 9 elections since independence and has become a democratic, liberal, Western-leaning country that wants to be part of the European Union and the Western world, and not a bulwark of totalitarianism like Belarus that is there to support Moscow's ambitions to dismantle democracy in other parts of the world. Ukraine didn't want that. They had a revolution in 2014. They overthrew the pro-Moscow oligarch that was running this country, and it was great. Right up to the day Russia invaded and decided to mass murder tens of thousands of civilians in this country. And when I got back to the United States and saw the invasion and the way that the invasion was going, precisely as I predicted, I saw some things that the United States news media and certainly a lot of military and political analysts didn't see. I saw that Ukraine could win this war. And I knew for a fact, and said this on air many times, there is no way the Russians will ever take the city of Kyiv. I've lived here. It's the size of Chicago, and it's got a 5 million person population. And there are literal old ladies who this very day are disappointed that they didn't get to throw their Molotov cocktails out the window on top of Russian soldiers because they defended the city successfully. The Russians never got near the city in any force, except for the one ambush the Ukrainians allowed them to have, which slaughtered an entire Russian column. So that being said, this context of this war and the precedence that comes before it has nothing to do with the geopolitical machinations of NATO or anything else. It has to do with the ex-KGB spy, Vladimir Putin, a man who loves to manipulate people, being so maddened by the thought of democracy on his doorstep, he decided to eliminate the people. He said that he wanted to eliminate the culture. He said he wanted to eliminate the language, and that the culture and history of Ukraine was a bunch of barbarians that was, according to him, invented in 1917 by invented by the Soviets at the end of the Russian Revolution, that was created by Lenin. This country and its capital city existed 1,000 years before Moscow was formed. There's a great meme where they have like the first basilica in the city of Kyiv, and then they show Moscow in 985, and it's a bunch of trees. And then they show Kyiv in the 10th century, and they show Moscow is a bunch of trees. In the 11th century, the sprawling metropolis with dozens of churches in Moscow is a bunch of trees. This country has been around a very long time. And believe me, just drive around it. And I have driven around every inch of this country, including the Carpathians. And this is a deep history in here. Then again, it took the Nazis 1.4 million men to subjugate this country. Russia thought they could do it with 178,000, and they're getting an education they did not bargain for. So with that, let me turn it back over to Chris, and let's get to the questions and the discussion.
You're stuck with me. I'm feeling
Amanda.
there's Chris. You go first, Chris.
Yeah, there we are. Hey, Malcolm, that was a great rundown. That's exactly why we wanted to have you here today. So I'm super grateful for your passion and your perspectives. So we'll dive right into questions and we'll provide answers to the extent that we can. We will take your lead. If there's something that I can address, I will jump on board. But go ahead, Amanda, over to you to see what interesting questions we have.
Yeah, we've got them coming in from all angles, which I love. One thing that popped up when you were there early before the actual, conflict began, and you were kind of, is wargaming an okay way to describe that? How much did you see play out that you had predicted? Were there any amazing surprises to that?
That's a very good question. I can tell you, I will confess my faults, okay? I'm a very good intelligence analyst. I saw a lot of things based on my past experience that gave me very early. And if I, I don't want to ring my own bell here, pull my shoulder muscle out by patting myself on the back. But I was on air very early on saying, this invasion's coming and there is no stopping it. All of the key intelligence indicators were showing up that I had seen in other invasions. I was deeply involved in the run-up to the invasion of Kuwait by the Iraqi army in 1991, even though I was assigned to a training school. But as I was going down to the skiff in the morning and reading the Middle Eastern read boards of all the collection that was happening, it was pretty clear they were going to invade Kuwait. And there were three key intelligence indicators that led that to me. I can tell you about now. I won medals for them. One was that the Iraqi army moved into all these positions with almost 100,000 men in the middle of the desert. And their army was saying it was an exercise. But over the next 2 weeks in the run up to the invasion, every weapons locker in Iraq was opening up. And they were moving millions of metric tons of artillery shells and ammunition. You do not move that for an invasion, for an exercise. That's an invasion. The second one was an Iraqi general, the commanding Iraqi general, left the plush Basra Sheraton Hotel on the banks of the Euphrates River and moved into a tent. So these guys, who are all Saddam's best friends, they like the comforts of the Sheraton. If they're going to move into the tent, they're going to do something definitive and then move into the Sheraton, Kuwait City, right? I mean, they're not going to live in that tent very long. And the third one, this indicator actually happened in the run-up to the invasion of Ukraine. I had worked the Iran-Iraq war mission in between other missions, and the most helicopters I had ever seen fly together in the Iran-Iraq war was 5. And then in about 4 or 5 days before the invasion of Kuwait, I saw 12 flights of 5 helicopters all fly to one base. And I was like, whoa, that's more helicopters than I ever saw fly together in the entire Iran-Iraq war, because they were worried about getting shot down. What are they going to do with 60 helicopters? So I thought, well, very obvious. Heliborne air assault into Kuwait City and seize all the major bases with a commando force. So of course, I had a lot of people going, that's crazy. The Iraqis wouldn't do that. And I was like, that's coming. And before I could go to bed that night, somebody called me and said, hey, there's fighting on the Kuwaiti border. The next morning I got up, I turned on BBC, and what's the first thing I see? 4 flights of 5 helicopters landing in Kuwait City outside the presidential palace where they were doing battle with the Royal Guard. And it was a commando force landing in Kuwait City. In the run-up to this invasion, the absolute, positively, no going back key intelligence indicator that I saw that would manifest itself 72 hours later was 70 Russian helicopters landing in a field, a forward rearm refueling point, 25 kilometers from the Iraqi border up near north of Chernobyl. And I was like, done, done, done. You don't move a massive assault force like that. That is Spetsnaz commandos, right? The Russian special forces. That is parachute-borne forces. And I had predicted they were going to do a jump into a major airport like Boryspil Airport, or they were going to jump directly into the city, or that they were going to seize an airport like Hostomel, which is the Antonov Airport, it has the largest airplane in the world. It's northeast of the city, northwest of the city. And if you take that runway, you can land anything on that. So that happened. Day one, hour one, those 70 helicopters took off, and there's a fabulous video of them coming over the reservoir, coming from east to west, and it was a stinger festival. The Ukrainians had been sitting there with dozens of stingers and were shooting down helicopters left and right. You can watch the video of it. It's fabulous. And it was just unambiguous. It was going to happen. So that is what led me to believe that this invasion was going on. More importantly, were the things that I had seen with the Ukrainian army. This army has been in the field and on the front line, not since Z-Day, as we call it, but Z-14. They were in the field, armed, ready, prepped for invasion 14 days before the invasion. So the Russians just ran into a wall of javelins and men who were just itching to beat them. So that's some of the things that I'd seen. Here, let me tell you something that I got wrong. Completely wrong, that every person in the world, even Vladimir Putin, is confused about. We thought this country would be knocked down in a massive, their internet would be knocked down in a massive cyber attack. And little did we know, Russian cyber really sucks. They're not very good at it. The Ukrainians had actually had a counterforce prepared for this. Only one major disruption happened, and that was in, I want to say, the banks in Ukraine for one day. That was it. Their cyber, if it's offensive, they have lost that war. I predicted that they would neutralize the internet across a broad swath of the country. Never happened. Even the Russians are using Ukrainian internet. So there you go. I was wrong. Everything else I was right about.
Yes, we understand. Okay, I have a totally ridiculous question, but I'm asking it for a reason because I want Chris to answer it. Okay. What time is it in Ukraine now?
It is 19:30 in the evening. Is that right, Malcolm?
Yeah, it's 19:30 hours here. It's 7:30 in the evening, even though the sun stays up to like almost 11 and it gets up at sunrise is 3:45 in the morning. It's crazy here. The clock. They do not do daylight savings time.
I wanted to add, it was a guest question, but Chris had told me, and I didn't know this right before we went on the program, that he had set his clock to Ukraine time long ago. So I thought that was an interesting look inside how an intelligence officer in the US is working that problem. Okay, back to much meatier questions. Is there any truth that at the beginning of the invasion, the Russians showed up with 3 to 5 days worth of food and supplies and their parade uniforms to get ready for marching through the streets after being welcomed with open arms? Is it possible that the leadership actually believed that, or was it a way to convince the grunts that they weren't being sent to a real war? Very interesting question.
Boy, I'm telling you, this is going to generate a huge swath of analysis in the in the Directorate of Intelligence in terms of what did the Russian leadership believe versus what they knew. And the way, yes, there is truth that they did show up with 3 days rations because they thought this was going to be like Desert Storm or, you know, a blitz. That's all the intelligence is indicating. They thought that this was going to be a blitz. They would jump the VDV, the Russian airborne, down into Kuwait City. Listen to me, right? It's almost a picture. It's a mirror image of that war. And they thought they would do this and that they would just zoom in like the 3rd Infantry Division did in Baghdad in 2003. And they would just, and that Zelensky would shake in his boots and just flee like Yanukovych did when he had protests against him. And then they would surrender the country and Russia would become an occupation force. And we saw this in the composition of the battle force itself. And this is where, you know, Defense Intelligence Agency and CIA need to go and, you know, have a log talk with the National Security Agency, because the things we see, all right, when National Geospatial Intelligence does a sweep, right, and they give you all that beautiful imagery and all these tanks are in the field and there's guys reloading, you know, 120 millimeter smoothbore cannons and doing maintenance, and all their food is being stacked up there and there's pallets of water. It looks formidable, right? But that's one source of intelligence. When you're guys at the CIA, I have a joke about this. This happened in 1987. I won't tell you the actual event that happened. I'll keep my confidences. But someone at the CIA, somewhere, at some time, took a pallet of gold bricks and dropped it in front of a source and said, start carrying out all the gold bricks until you can't carry anymore, and then give us whatever it is you have in your hand. Because what apparently happened, we had an entire copy of the Russian invasion plan, and that the administration and Director Burns and at the direction of the president was releasing intelligence to show not just the Russians, the Chinese, Zelensky, everyone, that not only do we know what they're doing, here's a copy of it, right? I'd only seen that once in my career. And I call that crown jewels intelligence, right? This is the kind of stuff that the guy has to order a truck to get all the money we would be willing to pay for that kind of intelligence. And apparently the Russians knew we knew it, but they believed that Joe Biden wouldn't do anything about it. And we did. We preempted a lot of their operations. We delayed the invasion. In fact, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, a member of parliament, a right-winger, had told us in December, because he has a big mouth, he's since passed away, he said, we will invade on February 20th, or I think it was February 14th, and if there's a delay, maybe a week longer. He gave away Z-Day. And, you know, we already knew. But again, you look at the tanks, you bring in the spies who give you the actual battle plan. How do you know if it's all true? And this is where you have to fuse your intelligence, right? So if you're at the National Security Agency, I'm going to give you a hypothetical so I don't have to betray any collection secrets, right? And, you know, Soldier A says to Soldier B, hey, man, only bring 3 days rations. We're going on a training exercise to Belarus. They believed that. They were told no higher than the level of major. What the truth was held below everyone, below battalion commanders and brigade commanders. And even they weren't told until the last 72 hours. And the many, if not the bulk of the invasion force entered Ukraine not knowing they were invading Ukraine, unless it was obvious, like the VDV or the Spetsnaz or the Kadyrovsky, you know, militias or PMC Wagner mercenaries. There were instances where there's a BMP crew there's video of it. A BMP crew went to a Sokar. Sokar is a gas station run by Armenians, Azerbaijanis, greatest amount of alcohol. If you ever want to go to a great gas station with alcohol, go to a SOCAR, Azeri, cognac, French wine, it's all in that place, right? You know, camembert cheese. The Russians pull into this place and they're buying, getting out, and people are throwing things at them and shouting at them. And they're like, why are you attacking us? And they go, you're in Ukraine. And he goes, no, we're not, we're in Belarus. They're like, so they got captured. These people, first off, Russian army, not an army, not an army at all. We refer to them as orcs, right? Like the dead that are dead elves bought up from Lord of the Rings, only about raping, pillaging, and eating, right? That is the Russian army. They are a horde. And only recently in the last month did they come under any measure of control. But they were supposed to come in, and like the guy said in Bucha, we were supposed to kill every military-aged man and then all of the old men and reservists because they would be partisans behind us. That was orders. This army, that group, that is the Russians, got what they got because they came here believing that they were going to be handed this country and they were going to eliminate Ukrainian culture, language, and like the one woman who said, go ahead and rape women so long as you use a condom, right? That's where we get this multi-source view when you have NSA, CIA, DIA, right? And then you have the mindset of the battle commanders and some of the confessions of the soldiers coming from open source intelligence or NSA collection, right? And you got guys who are like, hey, we took 80% losses today. Well, you're not going to get that from imagery. You're going to get burning tanks, but somebody crying into the phone telling his wife, 80% of my brigade's tanks were destroyed in a javelin party. Now we get to understand just how bad the program is, right? So it's been bad for the Russians, but here in the United States, this belief of whether the commanders really knew it, if the Russian leadership knew it, it doesn't matter. They believe it now. They are being forced to believe it now. And like the one mother said when she found that her son was a prisoner of war in distress, she shouted, now I have to give the money back.
Hey, let me just jump in there. That's great insight, Malcolm. Just give you a break for a second and just provide some historical context. And you may or may not agree with me. I'm sure you're going to be aligned with me on this. But United States intelligence officers, we had a tendency, certainly leading up to Desert Storm when we were going to fight Iraq, we have a tendency at times to paint our adversaries as 10 feet tall. I remember being very concerned going into the first Gulf War with our adversaries having the sheer masses that they had, the Iraqis. And I swore never to paint our adversaries as 10 feet tall again. And I learned over the years that we do have a tendency to worst case scenario when it comes to intelligence. And the other piece that I've talked to our guests about, Malcolm, you've obviously missed spy chats, you were busy, but we also talked about the fact that the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, is looking at how the agencies paint the will to fight. In other words, why did we underestimate, we being the United States, the Ukrainians' will to fight? Why did we paint the Russians as 10 feet tall, and the Ukrainians, we started all but suggesting that they were going to establish a government in exile and Zelensky was going to leave. So these are important questions, and I applaud the US intelligence community to look at that. And again, not to throw a monkey wrench into this discussion, but then we consider Afghanistan as well. We thought our Afghan partners would have had the will to fight. And of course, as soon as the United States left, the army faded away. So the community is suggesting that they're doing a detailed evaluation at how they arrive at those judgments.
Excellent question. That is an excellent question. And let me tell you, in the pre-war, here's where I knew. First, I drove everywhere in Ukraine. This country is huge. I just took a train. It took 8 hours to go overnight to go from the eastern city, of Kharkiv to Kyiv. it's going to take another 10 hours to go from Kharkiv to Lviv. And then it's going to take an hour to go from Lviv to the Polish border. That's 19 hours end to end. That's driving from New York City to Disneyland, in Disney World in Florida. This country is ginormous. So one of the things, and I immediately looked at the force structure and thought, how are you even going to start to occupy this country with 172,000 men? And interestingly enough, one of the things, you know, because of the nature of the work you and I were in, I started talking to companies that were here in Ukraine that were preparing defense activities for a very long partisan style war. But then I was invited to go to Avdiivka, which is a battlefront headquarters. It has the operational command post of the Ukrainian army in Luhansk and Donetsk. I met there General Pavlyuk. I want you to remember that name. General Pavlyuk, who was commander at that time of the entire Donetsk and Luhansk front. So we got a briefing from him. We also had at the time, because we had lots of journalists, General Cerski, who was commander of land warfare. He's command of every soldier in Ukraine. And at that time, they were saying, yeah, we see the Russians there, but they hadn't formed into battle groups, and they hadn't distributed ammunition, bought in bridging equipment, and brought up artillery. Within 72 hours of that briefing, I saw it. I saw all those groups move into formation just through open source intelligence and the information we were being briefed. And I remember one question was posed of General Pavlyuk, and they said, well, a CNN journalist said, well, what if the Russians come from the south? You have them here, but what if they come from the south? What if they come from the north? What if they come here? And he goes, here? He goes, they're 70 meters that way. Right there, 70 meters. And just as he said it, they opened fire just to remind us that there's machine guns can reach where we were. And he goes, and General Pavlyuk, this is when I knew the Russians were in trouble. He looked at the guy and he goes, I don't care what direction they come from. I'm going to fight them. And I thought, oh, geez, this guy can't be beat. I can just tell you right now, I've been around a lot of generals. This guy was a butt-kicking commander. I want to say ask him, but he is a butt-kicking commander, and this guy doesn't care. And he's been there for 3 years, and he would like a maneuver warfare fight that he could get his teeth around instead of being stuck on, 500 kilometers of trench, right? And he knew he was going to get it. He knew his command post a few days later would be decimated, literally vaporized by hundreds of shells of Russians. But that was just like, great, I'm unleashed. And then when I met General Cerski, very serious guy, right? All these journalists are going, what do you think of this general? What do you think of that general? And when I went up to him, he said, yes, you have a question. Like, oh, another boring journalist. But I'm not a journalist. I'm a spy that talks on television, right? I went up and I go, no, selfie. And he was so happy. And I said, you're going to beat these guys, aren't you? And he goes, yeah. I said, oh my God, these people bring war to us, war's coming to you. So, the commander, General Cerski, is now in command of all forces in Donetsk and Luhansk in the entire central battlefront, and he is pinning down 80% of Russia's forces. General Pavlyuk has now switched places with him, and he is in command of all land warfare forces. Let me tell you, the Russians don't know who they're dealing with. They should have gotten a biography of these guys and said they're about 5'5", and all they want to do is kick ass. I think we're in trouble.
So what has to change to break the stalemate in the East so that Ukraine can not only halt the Russian advances, but regain their eastern territories? I mean, these guys sound inspirational. Can they make any inroads?
Yeah. What's happening now is the Russians have figured out that they are not a maneuver warfare army, that they are, as the old adage goes, a artillery army with tanks. And what generally happens is when tanks move forward, and I said this, one of my poor fellow analyst at MSNBC, who was on the big board, Clint Watts, was pointing, and there were these big arrows of where the Russians were and where they were going to go. And I remember saying, hey, that's not correct. Those arrows do not point to the Russian objective. And I remember somebody said, well, what do they point to? I said, they point to tank graveyards. I mean, the Ukrainians let them have that road. They can have all the road they want. It is just, here's what's at the end of the road: javelins, NLAWs, Stugna anti-tank missiles, Panzerfaust 3s, Matadors. And that's what happened. We let them have the terrain that they had. And the best part was I remember the highway from Sumy to Kyiv to Borodyanka not Borodyanka, but Borodyanka, I think, in the northeastern part, Bovary, in the northeastern part of the city. And I was like, I want to become a partisan. I want to volunteer for that job. That's like 7 hours of fuel trucks with no protection. And that's exactly what they did. Special forces savaged. That's the only word to use it. Savaged their lines of supply. And what did you end up with? Tanks that ended up being abandoned because they had no fuel. It was pure, in some instances, partisan warfare. There is a partisan force here. There is massive special forces. There's territorial defense units that just like to go out and shoot things up. So the Russians just didn't know what they were dealing with. Now they have fallen back into this defensive strategy of just take the borders of Donetsk and Luhansk. So what do I need? I know on April 19th, I came on national, international television to declare that I had left news media and that I had become a member of the International Legion. And I had a private message to the president that I put on air. And I said, Mr. President, these people need the high mobility or the multiple rocket launch system. And at that time, that was not something Ukraine was asking for. They were asking for air defense zones. They were asking for a lot of things. They were not asking for HIMARS. And I think somebody at the Ministry of Defense was like, oh yeah, HIMARS, right? Why don't we give them a couple? We need HIMARS. We need the high mobility multiple rocket launch system and the multiple rocket launch system, M270 multiple rocket launch system, because we need to outgun Russian artillery. But we can't do it with the 8 units we've been given. We need 50, 100. If you look, the National Guard has 500. The National Guard. They're getting old. I'm sure they want to replace these things. Give it to the Ukrainians. Give it to them now. Give them all the missiles they can carry. As I like to say, take them from the 82nd Airborne, drive them from Rzeszów, Poland, drop them off at the border, leave the keys, and then somebody stole them, right? You wake up the next morning and all your HIMARS are gone. So, and then, what we do, we train them in Grafenwehr, Germany, and we take the vehicles and they position them right in the battlefield where they want them. And then the crews fly over and mate up and they're shooting rockets same day. We need, if you give us 50 HIMARS, this war will end because Russian artillery will cease to exist. And the Ukrainians are doing it. If you look at the heat map, watch Denis Davilov's Twitter feed or video on YouTube, and you get the heat map, and you see the Ukrainians are not bombarding the forward line of troops. They're bombarding command and control and artillery positions and weapons depots to neutralize their long-term advantage. Give them all the rockets they want and the long-range ones, the advanced tactical missile, which has not, give them the old ones that have 950 submunitions. Russian artillerymen will never go near their guns again if you use that weapon system, but they fly 500 kilometers and people are afraid you can hit Moscow. Well, how come Moscow can hit Kyiv, but we can't hit Russia? Bizarre. I got bombarded the other day by 203 millimeter artillery. That's 8-inch naval guns from Russia. That's not fair. I would like to have had a HIMAR to respond and make them vaporize that crew, make them regret that they were stupid enough to get up at 3:30 in the morning to wake me up and break my Twitter feed with 8-inch naval guns.
So Malcolm, I just want to jump in there.
Yeah.
That's tremendous to hear your insights again. I want to go back to Avril Haines and her scenarios. So I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm inclined to think if what you're suggesting is if the Ukrainians had the equipment they need, like the HIMARS, if they continue the flow from the West and into Ukraine and get the equipment that they need, they're certainly getting the training outside of Ukraine, as I understand it, then it is quite possible that those counterattacks can put Russia on its heels. So do you not think it's going to be a grinding struggle, but counterattacks from Ukraine can change the dynamic of this battle space right now?
There's a lot of hemming and hawing about how long this war is going to take. It's going to be a multi-year war. I will tell you right now, one of her assessments is just flat out wrong. It's flat out wrong. And that is the will of the Ukrainian people. Let me tell you right now, I had a guy who was an American. He was fighting with the Territorial Defense Unit, big combat. And he went to Lviv, which is out in the West. And he saw guys delivering sushi on bicycles and, you know, people eating ice cream, and he got upset. He was like, well, these guys are military age men. They need to fight. And I said, bro, this is why we fight. We fight to return normalcy so that you can go to the Lviv Opera and have a coffee, right? Or to hang out downtown or to listen to a band, a guy who's been displaced from Mariupol, right? We want that. But there's one thing you will not see in this country, and that is give up-itis. There's an old saying we say in the Middle East, you know, they will fight with their teeth. I think the Ukrainians they are settled in mentally, but their army, all they want to do is fight. I've got guys here, they're just like, why can't they let us go directly to the front? Yeah, a lot of it, you know, you don't want suicidal operations. You don't want, you know, as they said in the movie Apocalypse Now, tear-upping, terrorizing around and shooting up the stuff. You don't want that. You want a controlled strategy. A good example is Severodonetsk. There are a lot of people lamenting the fall of Severodonetsk and the Lysychansk pocket. Ukraine has fought in that exact pocket before. In 2014 and 2015, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Kramatorsk, that entire area, they know what they're doing. And as they at the Ministry of Defense said, we have cost the Russians thousands of lives to take 2 villages. And we are going to get those villages back. So when Russia exhausts its combat strength, its last punch, and I think that was a very, battle of the bulge-like punch by Russia. But as we exhaust their artillery, we blow up their supply trains, we start getting these spring conscripts who don't know what it's like to be at the receiving end of a HIMARS, then Russia will start to collapse. And when I say collapse, I mean like parts of their line will break in places they don't think it's going to break because they're spread out thin. They have 80% of their army in the Lysychansk pocket, 80%. So now punches are being thrown at Kherson. Down in the south, you never know. But we have the right rocket system. Look, we have M777s. We have over 108 of those things. They are bringing it. They are doing deep fires into Russian rear command and control. But at some point, you're going to wake up with your entire battle staff dead, and you're going to find out that your soldiers are dug in, and then they get hit with 980 submunitions. And they don't exist anymore. And a hole is formed. And suddenly these guys you thought were just trench warfare fighters are Patton-style maneuver warfare fighters who now have 300 Czech and Polish T-72s. Oh, and 120 Russian T-72s and T-80s and T-90s. Thank you, Russia. And start maneuvering through your rear and start breaking through because you don't have the artillery to stop them anymore. I think that this war, quite possibly on the terms Ukraine wants, of taking back Donetsk and Luhansk and Kherson province and pushing to the Crimea Bridge, I think that with the right support from the West, this latest package is good, 300,000, I believe, artillery shells. That means we're We're waiting for phase 2 of this war, where we have more artillery shells than the Russians do. And then it's going to really hurt. And the worst part is, hey, I'm there. Okay, sorry, but I am a frontline soldier, and it's not that I got to go out and have, raging firefights with Russian troops. Okay, I am helping coordinate some of the more lethal things that is happening in my district between my battalion intelligence, brigade intelligence, regimental and theater. Right? We are all working together to one goal: to make your, Russians' days unhappy, and to remember that phrase, welcome to hell. This is Ukraine.
Wow. We are almost out of time, but
wow,
we
that was
have
fast.
to, I know. And it's very disappointing for our guests, but I have to do one tiny question.
Sure.
People want to know, what can we in the West do to help? Is there something that we can really do to help? Is there a website that's useful? Is there some support that we can lend?
Yeah, well, I have been opposed for a very, very long time of getting into charities and donations, but this is the one time I'm going to. I still hold the title of executive director of the Terror Asymmetrics Project, and we have a website called Tapestry. That's TAPSTRI.org. And all of the operations and donations now that have gone into Tapestry since January have gone into supporting the Ukrainian International Legion in non-lethal support. That is getting them, we are the biggest buyer of ambulances. I know, because 2 of our ambulances were destroyed. We had 2 Unimog ambulances that were direct hit by large artillery, and we had a van. I know we just received a small 1-person ambulance as a donation, but vehicles, the way that we medevac our soldiers off the mountain, off the areas that we are in, and we have taken casualties. We have, just in the last 2 weeks, we took dead and wounded, several. We had a mass casualty event caused by a massive bombardment. We put them in pickup trucks. So Tapestry up to this point has been, using all of its money and resources to buy trucks. As a matter of fact, we just bought, with our last donations, we just bought another pickup truck to be used as a tactical medevac vehicle, because throw them in the back of the vehicle and get them down to the medical force, so the medical force doesn't have to expose their evacuation ambulances to direct fire from the Russian forces. So if you want to make a donation, today's a great day to do it, because we're in this campaign called,
we'll drop the link in to that. And thank you for specifying that it's for non-lethal.
Non-lethal.
Yeah, because we got
sometimes.
I know. You're lethal. We getting that idea. It's very, very faint thought on that. But anyway, Chris, do you want to say anything before? I'm sad that we have to wrap up.
Yeah, this is the fastest program that we've run. This has been very, very insightful, Malcolm, and I'm personally grateful. Our team is grateful that you would share your insights with our audience. We try to deliver on facts and perspectives and opinions based on experiences. A lot of the experiences come from intelligence officers, but also policymakers. So this gives us a lot to think about. We never got to the discussion of resistance. You did talk about the principles of individuals willing to be essentially partisans. We know that that has taken off. We've discussed that on Spy Chat. So more to follow. We'll continue to carry the torch, so to speak, and make sure we have serious discussions on these issues. This doesn't prevent us from reaching out to you and having you answer our questions to help educate our audience. So I'm really excited that we pulled this one off. Thanks, Malcolm. Safe travels home. And we're excited about next month's Spy Chat. I'll kick it over to Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been incredible to have you stream in to us, Malcolm, and Chris always providing commentary. And and balancing. We really appreciate that. I apologize to our audience for the many questions we didn't get to, but this is way too meaty. I want to thank everyone for being here. Malcolm, I want you to stay safe. I want our guests to stay well. I want to invite anyone who can be in the DC area next Thursday, July 14th, to come to an in-person event with real spies in the gallery. So check out our website to see about that and other programs. And if you've enjoyed this, you can donate to Malcolm's organization, and you can also donate to the International Spy Museum, because donations really keep us going throughout the year and able to offer these programs. So thank you so much, everyone. Bye, everybody.